The bombshell that was the Toronto St. Paul's by-election continues to reverberate throughout Canadian politics, the Liberal Party of Canada in particular. What does this mean for the Liberal Party's future? Does it mean that Toronto is vulnerable? Hi, I'm Brian Lilly. This is the Full Comment Podcast, and today we're going to look at what the by-election result means, where Trudeau may end up in the future, and what's the future of the Liberal Party if and when somebody takes over. Joining me today to talk about this is Andrew Perez. He is a Liberal strategist, former political staffer, someone who works in the communications field and follows the issues closely. Andrew, you're one of the people that has been advocating for the Prime Minister to step down. Before I ask you your view on why Justin Trudeau should step down, let me back up and ask you about the by-election from a week ago. I was on record. I thought Leslie Church, the Liberal candidate, was going to eke out a win. I thought, yeah, it'll be closer than the 15 to 20 points the Liberals normally win by, but she's still going to win. So even I was shocked. Some Liberals had told me, no, we're going to lose. Did it surprise you what happened in Toronto St. Paul's, the heart of Toronto, voting for a Conservative?
Well, first, Brian, thanks so much for having me on your podcast. Really happy to be here. I was also on the record. I did lots of media in the weeks leading up to the by-election, and my sense, following and speaking to folks on the Liberal campaign in St. Paul's, was just that we would eke out probably a victory within 4 or 5 points at the most, which I was warning in my media interviews in itself was a pretty dire sign that a riding that we won by 24 points less than 3 years ago would be down to the wire. So I was also stunned when the party lost it. Look, I think two things can be true at the same time. I think, obviously, by-elections, you can't always read too much into them. And I think in this case, Toronto St. Paul's, it was genuinely a perfect storm for the Conservatives to take this riding for the first time in 31 years. And I think that perfect storm was
well, really, the first time in 35 years, because the last time they won it,
that's true,
was 1988. I keep making the point that there are a lot of people who voted in this by-election who were not alive the last time that this riding went Conservative federally.
That's true. And it's interesting because Toronto St. Paul's prior to 93 was considered to be a bellwether. It was a riding that Barbara McDougall, a high-profile cabinet minister in the Mulroney era, held. It was a riding held by the Ontario PCs for decades. But, and I think Andrew Coyne makes the point, that was an era where the progressive Conservatives and the Liberals were, in hindsight, pretty indistinguishable. And, if there's any riding in Canada that has a lot of Laurentian elites and, that would be it. And so
to quote my old friend, Daryl Bricker, Laurentian elites. I've got a bunch of friends in the riding. Some of them may even, resemble that description. So it used to be a bellwether. It hasn't been in a while, but there has been, you mentioned that the parties used to be indistinguishable. While, some would argue the Conservatives have gone right, you can't also help but say, well, the Liberals under Justin Trudeau have gone left. And you've got people who are, I know there's been a lot of talk about significant Jewish community, and I won't understate that, but there's also a lot of professionals being hit by the capital gains tax changes. And then you've just got people who, as happens with every party, every politician, they're just disaffected from their leader because they're like, okay, you've been around long enough. You're not doing it for me anymore.
So that's just it. So I guess returning to my point, I think there were a mixture of national and local factors that amounted to a perfect storm. So on the national scene, obviously, this is a deeply unpopular government that's consistently 15 to 20 points behind in the polls. Obviously, that loomed large over a by-election, even in a historically safe riding. And then the two key local issues, I think you just cited them correctly. This is a riding with about 15% of the population that's Jewish. I hear people quibbling about that number exactly. I mean, all to say it's probably one of 5 or 6 ridings in Canada where, the Jewish community's vote can have an impact. There's no doubt that that was the case. Anecdotally, I know friends in the Jewish community who live in the riding. Longtime Liberals, what I heard was either they were staying home or they were going right over to the Conservatives. And then, the capital gains inclusion rate changes, I don't think went over well in that riding. So when you add the national...
A lot of doctors, a lot of small business owners, professionals, people who were told by the government, well, you don't have a pension plan, save for your retirement inside your corporation. Oh, wait, we're going to hit your corporation with a huge tax increase.
Yes. And the final thing I'd mention, I really don't know if this had any impact. I personally think that Leslie Church is a terrific candidate with an excellent CV. I know her a bit. I like her. I think that her concession, the statement that she put out was feisty, but also said, look, we heard your message. I just say on that when you put up a candidate that was the chief of staff to the finance minister and the deputy prime minister, that you're putting out a candidate there that's really aligned with the government of the day. And I'd be curious to know if that really had an impact, if the residents of St. Paul were acutely aware of that.
In a normal election, she would have been the perfect candidate. I've dealt with Leslie Church a bit during her time in government. She's been in and out of government for a long time, and I've been covering federal politics for longer than I want to admit, but also dealt with her when she was at Google and YouTube, working in the private sector. So she's a smart woman. I actually don't even know Don Stewart. As far as I can recall, have not met him, and he is now the Conservative MP, which surprises an awful lot of people I had spoken to, senior people in the Conservative headquarters, who said to me at noon on Monday, as voting's happening, we are not winning this. We were never going to win this. And anyone that tells you we're winning is lying. And then messaged someone I know that was working on the Liberal campaign around midnight as the votes are starting to come in. And I said, congratulations. Looks like your team won. And they said, we're afraid of the advance polls. And when I woke up at 6:30 in the morning, it was a complete flip. So you were one of the first, maybe the first that I saw to say, look, the prime minister has to step down here. Is it his personal unpopularity that you think is holding the party down? Latest Abacus poll, I think, is 23% for the Liberals, 42% for the Conservatives. Everybody has them playing in that bandwidth, a point here, a point there. Once in a while there'll be a Nanos poll where somebody says, oh, look, we're just 12 points behind now. Well, that's still a majority win for Pierre Poilievre with the Conservatives. Do you think that Trudeau is at the core of the issue with voters, or has he just become the face? Why are you calling for him to step down?
So I guess, just to be clear in terms of your listeners, I've actually probably since the 2021 election been writing and pontificating on how I feel the Liberal Party has, to some degree, I mean, much more now, but even 3 years ago, lost its way in terms of moving away from being a Big Tent brokerage party. And then that culminated in an op-ed in the Toronto Star over the Easter long weekend, just about 3 months ago, where I didn't quite call for his resignation, but it was, the headline was that the Liberal Party has lost its way, and a party that I've been involved in for 20 years. So to me, this loss is another proof point in my thesis. And I think I think there's a number of factors, but I think we're now at the point where people have stopped listening to Trudeau. They're sick of looking at him. They're sick of listening to him. Whether you agree with the policy agenda or not, it's not penetrating their key target audiences. They've made so many announcements in the lead up to the budget, and I don't see any dent in the gap in public opinion polling. Nothing seems to be working. So as
they've been running around for months now, since last September, when they finally realized, oh, wait, housing is an issue and we better do something, not just make announcements. They seem to, at that point, it was the Liberal caucus retreat in London, Ontario. And Trudeau came out with a bunch of ministers, a bunch of MPs, and rolled up sleeves and, oh, we get it, and we're going to work on it now. Well, he made an announcement about giving out money from the Housing Accelerator Fund, which at that point was almost 2 years old. So 2 years prior, they'd said, we're going to do something about housing affordability. And then almost 2 years later, they say, okay, well, here's the money and we're going to build homes. And now housing starts are going down and homes are no more affordable. And you've got this dental care program, which most dentists are not signing up for. And so the people that are promised the care won't get it. And you've got the childcare program where they made promises more than they can keep. And it seems like, so I wrote a piece a little while ago saying Trudeau can promise, but he can't deliver. Other colleagues of mine, like Chris Elliott, National Post, have said it seems like with this government, which keeps blaming the comms and keeps saying, oh, no, we got to fix the comms. It seems like all they have are comms and they don't have deliverables. You've been around successful governments. You have to execute at some point, and these guys aren't executing. And I think that's part of why the public is just not listening anymore. It's like, well, I've been hearing you say that forever.
Exactly.
Where's the beef, as they used to say?
And I think it's a number of factors. I mean, the government's obviously, getting long in the tooth. I think a lot of the smartest, savviest advisors that were part of this government's successes, obviously Gerald Butts is the high profile name that comes to mind. But there's a lot of other people like Tyler Meredith, who I know quite well and often spar with on Twitter. A lot of them have left, and Leslie Church has left. And so I wonder, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I have relationships across the entire government, but you have to wonder, is this the B or the C team? And you're right. It's an obsession with issues management. It's an obsession with, Katie Telford infamously said, I think at the height of COVID or perhaps prior to COVID, that they were going to line up some op-eds to deal with an issue, right? And so I think that's a perfect illustration of how many of Justin Trudeau's advisors and key folks handle issues. But you're right, it is substance. And I put out a tweet earlier this week saying we need new leadership and we need better policies. And some people came at me, progressive liberals, and said, well, what do you mean better policies? You don't support childcare and dental care and pharmacare? Well, I do to some extent. But, the deficit, the debt, I think this government, we don't talk about as liberals anymore about wealth creation and competitiveness. We talk about how to divvy up the pie, but we don't talk about creating a more prosperous and a more wealthy society. Well,
as Belinda Stronach, who was famously in both the conservatives and liberals, used to say, we need to bake a bigger pie. That was her slogan.
Yes.
We need to bake a bigger pie. And you're right. The Trudeau liberals are constantly saying, how do we divvy up a smaller pie? I mean, this capital gains tax thing, they said we're going to bring in like $19.7 billion over 5 years. About a third of that, no, more than a third of that, is $6.9 billion was in the first year. Well, the first year, it only applies to a few months. Why did they expect that? Because all the wealthy people are going to sell everything off before it took effect June 25th, the day after the by-election, and they're going to get a big windfall. And then after that, it's diminishing returns. So that means in a couple of years, they're going to have to say, well, we didn't look after the deficit. We didn't look after the debt. We're not funding the programs we promised properly. Now we're going to have to go back and slice the pie thinner. And meanwhile, to make a Friends reference, the rest of us are like Joey when Monica's trying to cut him a slice of pie. No, a little bigger, a little bigger. What, are you afraid you're going to run out? Like, we want more pie. You got to grow the economy. I don't think that's part of the liberal lexicon anymore, and it used to be.
So, and I want to be clear. Like, I call myself a centrist. I'm very progressive on social issues, and I've supported many of this government's signature programs, like the Canada Child Benefit, which lifted millions of children out of poverty. This government has had, some major successes, but there, to your point, there isn't that balance that we saw in previous iterations of the federal Liberal Party, certainly under Chrétien Martin, where there is a balance between social progress and strong economic stewardship. The cabinet, and I wrote about this in the National Observer as far back as 2021. The cabinet under previous iterations of the party was a coalition of business-minded people and more what we call social liberals. In the first Trudeau term, I mean, Trudeau was clearly from when he became opposition leader a progressive liberal. It was unambiguous where he was going to plant the federal Liberal Party, and in the context of the times, that made sense. And even in his first term, he had Bill Morneau and Jim Carr and Scott Bryson and Ralph Goodale. These were all, for lack of a better term, business liberals who understood the economy, who understood balancing these interests. Well, none of those individuals are around the cabinet table anymore. And the ministers that are there that have a business background, like Champagne and Anand, I think their wings are clipped. So I want to see and we can get into this later, when the party ultimately rebuilds, I want to see a genuine discussion about what we stand for. And I think the brand conflation with the NDP is a huge problem for me.
So just the other day, you had 5 Liberal cabinet ministers out doing dental care announcements, including Mark, people are gargling with gasoline Holland, and who else showed up and did a dental announcement on the same day with the same talking points? Jagmeet Singh. Don't tell me you're not in a coalition when you're, by the Oxford Dictionary definition, it is a coalition. There may not be people in cabinet, but you're in a coalition, and I think it's hurting both parties. And that small little bit of him doing his own dental care announcement, to me, shows that. So you've been around. You were around at Queen's Park in the McGuinty era. You were around for the Wynne era. Wynne didn't. We all knew that when Kathleen Wynne took over the Ontario Liberal Party, that she was more on the progressive side than Dalton was. Dalton McGuinty was, despite what his critics would say, Dalton McGuinty was kind of a centrist liberal.
He was.
Little bit to the left, little bit to the right. He'd bounce around. I always said that McGuinty, to me, and he was my MPP for years, I said, he looks like he's governing like a New England Republican governor. That was kind of his style. Wynne came in and got progressively progressive, and at one point tried to outflank the NDP. I thought she was trying to take them over. Do you think that's what Trudeau's been trying to do with his moves to the left? Because, as I say, I don't think it's worked out for either one. He hasn't killed off the NDP. They haven't, folded up their tents and gone away. But people that were in the center are kind of looking around and either sitting on their hands or switching sides.
I feel like I could write an essay on this topic, Brian, because I think there's so many different factors. I think our political spectrum has evolved since the 1990s. Obviously, on the federal scene, we had 2 right-of-center parties. I think the rise of the NDP in the Layton era really it forced the Liberals to, from a strategic point of view, and David Hurley talks about this, about trying to get that NDP support to defeat Conservatives. And we all know the strategic voting line that is a very cynical one, but in previous elections works. So I think in the Wynne case, it was very interesting because Wynne is one of the very few examples, and it relates to today, a leader that succeeded a relatively unpopular leader and was able to rebrand the party in her image and go on to win an election. Now, Horwath at that time was almost seen to be to the right of Kathleen Wynne. And certainly in urban areas, Wynne was the preferred option among progressives. Hudak ran objectively a pretty hard right campaign, and that also facilitated that upset majority. I'd be hard pressed to see that scenario happening here. I will say, I don't think there's any way we can win with Trudeau right now. Selecting a new leader is high risk. It's higher risk. And there's always the risk that you end up with a Kim Campbell or a John Turner. I'm certain that Brian Mulroney would not have won 2 seats in 93. And I'm pretty certain Pierre Trudeau would have won more than 40 seats in 1984. So there is an argument on the other side. Those who want Trudeau to stay, I disagree with them, but they're not completely crazy. I think. Okay,
well, I've written a column on maybe Justin Trudeau is the best option for the Liberals in the next election. Let's talk about that when we come back. We'll take a quick break, come back, talk about should Trudeau go, should he stay, is he the best option, or does Mark, hello fellow beer drinkers, Carney replace him? More in moments. So for all the talk of Justin Trudeau having to go, that his welcome is worn out, is he perhaps the best option for the Liberal Party going into the next election? Andrew, I wrote about this in the pages of the Toronto Sun. I said, maybe Trudeau's not leaving because he's looked around the room and he went, okay, Chrystia Freeland talks to adults like they're 4-year-olds at story time with their, sitting cross-legged on the carpet. Mark Carney can't communicate, holds a beer can like he's never seen one while cheering for the Edmonton Oilers. Nobody knows who Anita Anand is outside of the caucus. Frankie Bubbles or Francois-Philippe Champagne, he's a guy I like, but I'm not sure he would, sit with the base of the party today. Melanie Joly, Dominic LeBlanc, would they do better than me? I think that's part of Trudeau's calculus, I think, at this point.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting question because you're right. I think we need a new leader, but in my view, it has to be the right leader. And it's, I was reading Martin Redcon penned an article. He interviewed Kathleen Wynne, and she's reflecting back on the very tough decision that she made probably in 2017 that she was going to stick around. I think probably midway, and you would recall this vividly, probably, Brian, I think midway through her majority government term, she began tanking in public opinion polls, not unlike what we're seeing today. And, they put out OHIP Plus and they put out a dental program and a lot of progressive, left-leaning New Democrat, if you will, policies, and it was having no impact. And she actually reasoned she thought that she was still the best placed to potentially eke out another win, or if not, a strong opposition. She didn't see anybody in the lexicon that would have that ability. So there is some credence to that argument, but in hindsight, we know what happened. And I just think that Trudeau has...
They went down to the minivan party.
Yeah.
But maybe somebody else would have taken them even lower.
Yeah.
I mean, is Stephen Del Duca, who I met with and said, oh, Brian, I'm a Chrétien centrist and I'm going to run as the Ontario Liberals as a centrist party, still ran like the NDP and couldn't get them party status back. So, that is the calculus that the leader has to think about.
And that's something I'm interested in exploring more. Why? And yes, it worked in 2014, the tack to the left, outmaneuver the NDP, consolidate that progressive vote. But and it worked in 2015. We know that Tom Mulcair was arguably running to the right of Justin Trudeau. But in subsequent elections, it didn't work in 2018 for Wynne. It didn't really, I don't think you could really say that approach worked in 2019 or 2021 for Trudeau. We lost the popularity.
No, he eked out the smallest successive majorities in Canadian history in terms of popular vote.
So why, as Liberal parties, are we still tacking to the left? Why is that the strategic? It's like just the instant reflex that we're going to tack to the left. We're going to sound like New Democrats. We're going to govern more like New Democrats. And I'm not. Look, I was a young child.
You're in the Liberal Party, so let me ask you, because my view is that you talked about the political spectrum having moved over the years. It ebbs and flows. But I would say that right now, the people on any levers of power in federal or the few provincial Liberal parties that remain, that they view themselves as progressives and not centrists. And the old Liberal Party used to succeed because, as my Italian friends would say, una gamba, one leg each side, and you straddle. And that can be a dangerous spot sometimes, but it can also lead to great success. And it did for the federal Liberal Party for more than a century. And if you decide, no, I don't want one leg over here, one leg over there, and just say, look, I'm in the middle, I'm comfortable for everybody come to me, ignore the extremists on either side. If you're going to say, no, I'm going to fight for that space on the left wing, and you're suddenly not the centrist party, you're another progressive party, which is how Trudeau just describes it as a progressive movement. He's built the party or altered the Liberal Party into a movement centered around him.
Well, this is the challenge. You've got in Quebec, the Bloc Québécois, which is, they're a nationalist party, but they're broadly center-left. You've got the NDP, you've got the Green Party, and then you've got the Liberal Party. So if we continue down this path, I don't think Pierre Poilievre's brand of conservatism is palatable for most Canadians. And while I do think he'll be prime minister, I really wonder what his prospects are to be a long-serving PM. And that's why I think this renewal within the Liberal Party is so exciting, because we have an opportunity with a new leader to potentially win a minority, and if not, at least form a respectable opposition and rebuild our party and hold that government to account, because I think that government will be outside the mainstream. I think Trudeau.
I think that people believe things about Poilievre that simply aren't true because they don't know him. And I will admit that I've known him for 20 years now, and he's not the extremist that folks are painting him out to be. And so that you know, but you can the Liberal Party will have to deal with that at some point. If and when he becomes prime minister, they'll have to realize, oh, well, he's saying things that we really don't like, but that aren't offside Joe and Jane front porch in Barhaven or in Scarborough or in, Surrey or wherever across the country. They're going to say, well, I'm okay with that. Much like, Liberals in Ontario yelled and screamed that Doug Ford was so far right wing. Now, Pierre Poilievre is much more conservative than Doug Ford. But the idea that Doug Ford is some raving right-wing lunatic, that did not work out well in Doug Ford's second majority government where he grew, because he wasn't there. And going over the top won't help.
Well, it's interesting because, your bread and butter is Ontario politics. I think, and it's too early to really make a conclusion, but I think that Bonnie Crombie is trying to present a more centrist party. And you've seen even this week that they're, the candidate signs, the announcements of nominating candidates, Bonnie Crombie's candidate in Ottawa South, Bonnie Crombie's candidate in Don Valley West. Now, that's branding. It harkens back to the Paul Martin era where it was Paul Martin's Liberals. But I think Bonnie is trying to fashion a more centrist party. So I'll be curious to see what level of success that has.
Things are so bad for Justin Trudeau, though, that the Ontario Liberal leader distanced herself in an interview with Global News. You were part of that package. I watched it. She distanced herself from Justin Trudeau. It was almost as if she said, Justin Trudeau? Who's that? I've never met the guy. I was in caucus with him for 3 years, from 2008 to 2011. I met him multiple times as mayor of Mississauga, but I don't really know him. To me, that said a little bit about where I think it was a misstep for Crombie, but to me, it said more about Trudeau. He is becoming toxic. So you think he should leave? We agree that he's got to make this assessment of whether that's the best thing for him, for the party, for the country. I think, in those equations, his own views weigh or his own interests weigh heavier than the party or the country, but that's my view of Justin. Who else would come in? I like someone like Frankie Bubbles, as I call him. Champagne is someone that I think is much more like a Jean Chrétien liberal. Mélanie Joly, though, that's someone, one of the issues in Toronto St. Paul's was the government's stand on the war in Israel, between Israel and Hamas. I've said publicly multiple times that I think Mélanie Joly, as our foreign affairs minister, is trying to make Canada part of Team Hamas. She has made statements. She still hasn't taken down her tweet from mid-October claiming that Israel bombed a hospital, killing hundreds of people. She is offside of where bipartisan consensus has been on this issue for decades in this country.
Mm-hmm. So on the leadership question, I've been reflecting on that more since the by-election result, and I'm genuinely struggling with it because my instinct is that any current minister is not going to be a real starter, because we know the average person consumes very little politics, but the headline will be Liberals elect X leader who has been a minister for 10 years under the Trudeau government. So I feel that we need to go outside the government. And
you're right about that. There's only going to be a few ministers that people would actually know, Freeland being one of them.
And that she would not be. And now Dominic LeBlanc, I'm getting the sense through my networks that he could be a front runner. And
he's one of the most astute politicians I've watched in any party at any level of government. He knows how to get things done, and he goes in elbows up, but he has a quality that he shares with people like Doug Ford. He makes you want to like him. Whether you're on the same team or not, he's like that, shucks, ha.
And that's why he was intergovernmental affairs and built productive and fruitful relationships with conservative premiers. And I've followed Dominique LeBlanc for 24 years. I like the guy. I think there's many excellent qualities that he has, but this is someone that was elected to parliament in the year 2000. And prior to that, he was a Chrétien staffer.
And prior to that, he was Justin Trudeau's babysitter.
And he's a very close personal friend of Justin Trudeau, which, again, like, no shade on any of that. But is that what a renewed... I agree. I think probably in terms of his qualities and his disposition and his pragmatism, he's a strong communicator. He probably ticks off almost every box.
But is he too close to the government?
Precisely. The one exception might be Sean Fraser. I know that a lot of people are critical of his role as immigration minister and what that led to. And I could see the Conservatives pillaring him for his tenure in the immigration ministry. But I know firsthand, based on tweets that I've put out, saying that I think Sean Fraser is a promising future leader, Conservatives just went crazy. Like, I do think, and he does hold a riding that's not very safe. I think he's behind in that riding of Central. I'm not sure the current name. It was Central Nova one day, Peter MacKay's former riding.
Yeah.
You know, he's a millennial. He's smart. He's a good communicator. He's attractive. I don't mean to.
Oh, no. Nobody votes based on that. Nobody's ever elected other than Justin Trudeau.
So these are all, but he's a part of the cabinet. So I still think we need to go outside the government. But the only two names are Mark Carney and the other name I'm hearing, which isn't being reported on a lot, but I know that this individual is considering it, is Christy Clark. And that's an intriguing name for me because Christy Clark led a BC Liberal government, which we know is a coalition of Liberals and Conservatives.
She's definitely on the federal Liberal side of that coalition, but it was a coalition, and she's not an NDP type. She fights the NDP hordes, as they say out there.
Been very critical of Justin Trudeau. I think she even endorsed Jean Charest in the Conservative leadership race. And she is someone that she's someone that took over from Gordon Campbell, and the party was way, way behind and won an election. I remember it was 2013. I think it was Adrian Dix was the NDP leader.
So I was in her campaign headquarters doing live TV and reporting when that happened. And we all expected that the Liberals were going down in defeat. And you would have been in awe of the people coming through. I had federal Liberals coming by to talk to me while I'm on TV. I had Stockwell Day dropping by to say, Christy Clark's going to win. In terms of backroom people, it was Warren Kinsella working on her campaign, Nick Kouvalos, who's now Doug Ford's pollster, Dimitri Pantsopoulos.
Don Guy, I believe.
Don Guy. All these backroom people from both the Liberal and the Conservative parties who normally battle out against each other were working together. And she won. For the most part, she led a successful government until the end, which is always how it works, right? You're successful in politics until you're not.
And that's the thing. This individual is auditioning likely to be opposition leader. So the disposition of that person, they have to be a street fighter. They have to be someone. We know that leader of the official opposition or leader of the third party, it's the worst job in politics because you have to stand up every single day and be negative and criticize. And even if you agree with what the government's doing, you have to poke holes in it and find a way to say that you oppose it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of politicians who excel in government aren't cut out for being scrappy opposition leaders.
And you think Christy Clark could be?
Absolutely. When I look at her disposition, she's smart, but she's scrappy. She's a good communicator. She's not a pointy head intellectual like you would suggest Mark Carney is. She is certainly...
Oh, I don't suggest Mark Carney as Mark Carney is.
She is certainly a centrist. And if anything, on economics and natural resource policy, she is, I think, center right. She's a social progressive. She's from BC. I think it might behoove the Liberal Party to find a leader from that doesn't hail from Central Canada. I think we need a radical. We need to we need to be looking outside the box. Maybe there's going to be other people that come out of the woodwork from different, I don't know, different facets of society. But I'm surprised that all these lists it's 95% current cabinet ministers. Like, I don't think that's going to cut it.
I don't think so either. My friend and colleague from National Post, Rahim Mohammed, did put out a fun tweet. Didn't mention Christy Clark's name, didn't mention Kim Campbell's name, but he showed a map of the 93 election results, and he just said, here's what happened the last time a party picked an obscure woman from British Columbia to run.
I didn't see that, but
that's funny.
It's funny, but it's totally unfair, because beyond being a woman and from BC,
she was premier, and she does have some profile across the country. But let's talk about Mark Carney before we run out of time. He worked well with the Harper government, with Stephen Harper, with late Finance Minister Jim Flaherty. Went on to be, while he was Bank of Canada governor, went on to be Bank of England governor. He has since, shown himself in statements. He's a smart guy. He's an economist, very much on the progressive side, though. And my view of him, and this is from covering him, smart guy, nice guy, affable, can't communicate.
So I would challenge you a bit, Brian, on your first comment around being on the progressive side. I mean, he is progressive for sure, and certainly on climate change, that's been a huge focus of his. I attended, I'm sure you I don't know if you were there, or I'm certainly you heard about the speech through the grapevine. It was covered at length by the Star. He gave a speech, Canada 2020 speech, actually two speeches, one in Ottawa, one in Toronto. The Toronto speech actually differed from the Ottawa speech, because the Ottawa speech took place before the budget and before the capital gains announcement. That speech was a traditional Liberal speech. He actually said, there was a line, you can't redistribute money that you don't have. He talked about a growth agenda, an abundance agenda, the need to, again, not use the word, but essentially build a bigger economic pie. Mark Carney is a centrist. He is unabashedly progressive on the environment and on climate change, which he sees as an existential crisis. But what I'm getting from him, and listening to his speeches, is there would be a pivot in policy in terms of the economy and how.
That's interesting.
So I would challenge that. And on the communication, yes,
he can speak to boardroom level. He can speak to the C-suite. Can he speak to the average person? And I know he comes from humble backgrounds, and I say this with no disrespect, but I used to cover him a lot during the financial crisis, and at times his news conferences were impenetrable. I'm there trying to get a clip for News Talk 1010 in Toronto and CJAD in Montreal, and you're looking at it saying, there's nothing I can use. Can you say something like it's the average person can understand?
So Mark Carney is a bit of a curious case to me, because he's been telegraphing publicly in the media since at least early 2021, when he appeared virtually at the Liberal Party's convention during COVID, that he supports the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister, and he'll do everything he can to support the party. Those were his words. So he's been telegraphing his interest in running for at least 3 or 4 years. He didn't run in the last election. Like, I think he needs to seek a seat in Parliament. And
I think he needs to show that he knows how politics works.
But if he's smart, I agree. The communications are a weakness. If he's smart, he'll be working with a coach right now and doing the media training. And it's hard to relearn. Like, if you're an intellectual by nature, a PhD, you've been the governor of 2 banks, you speak in a certain way. So that's very hard. But I think he can do that. And I think maybe I'm naive, but I look at a country like France, someone like Emmanuel Macron. Do we as Canadians not want to elect smart, accomplished people?
You want a smart leader. Absolutely. I don't think that we have one now.
With the economic challenges that we have, to me, and maybe I'm living in my, in an echo chamber here, downtown Toronto, but to me, if he could get in a debate with Pierre Poilievre and expose the weaknesses and the shallowness of that agenda, in my view, and say, look, here's my experience. Here's what I like no bullshit politics. Like, here's what we need to do. And this is my assessment of the country. Here's where we've gone wrong under the current government. Here's what I would do. but where's your plan, Mr. Poilievre? Here's my plan. Here's what I would do. I think Canadians maybe would buy into that and say, this guy is smart. He may not be the best communicator. And I think it would be a nice contrast with Poilievre.
I think if he could do that training and learn to communicate, he'd be a threat. And you can learn that. And just because you're a PhD doesn't mean that you can't speak in simple terms. The toughest thing to do often is speak short sentences and make yourself clearly understood. George Orwell's essay on language and politics, Mark Twain's comment, I would have written a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. You've got to be able to condense your words. You've got to be able to summarize your thoughts, and in a way that you don't need to be a PhD. Most of the population that's going to vote for you is not at that level.
And I agree with you, Brian. And that's why I think, like, if he had run in 2021, Ottawa Centre was open at the time when Catherine McKenna resigned, and had run and got himself into the ring and into the battle and showed his mettle, and he would have been appointed to cabinet. I don't know if it would have been finance, but a senior economic post. This was the problem Bill Morneau had. He had no experience in politics. He was thrust into Parliament, instantly became Minister of Finance, and was in question period and at committee, and obviously wasn't, he would have been well to have served in opposition for a term. So I agree with you. The challenge with Mark Carney is he's skipping a couple steps. He's going straight to the leadership.
Yeah. Well, Christy Clark's from outside, but knows how politics works. Mark Carney's from the outside, but doesn't. This is going to be the topic of the summer, I think, for Politicos, Andrew. It's going to be something that we all speculate on until something happens. It will be, will he, won't he? At times it will be, where's Waldo? Where is the PM? Is he at a cottage or is he going to resign? The rumors will be endless, but that's fun for guys like you and I. Thanks so much for the time today.
Thank you so much.
Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andrew Perez. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Subscribe to Full Comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. Help us out by giving us a rating, leaving a review. Tell your friends about us. And thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.